In the summer of 1944, 34 German women rode into the Texas Panhandle expecting punishment. Not confusion, not mercy. Punishment. They had crossed an ocean under guard. They had been searched, counted, written down, and loaded into an army bus with canvas shades over the windows. Most had served as nurses, clerks, canteen workers, or Red Cross aides, but to the Americans, they were still enemy women. And then the bus slowed near a barbed wire gate outside Amarillo, and the first thing they saw was not a rifle. It was a cowboy. He rode along the fence line on a bay horse, one hand loose on the reins, his hat pushed low against the white sun. Behind him, cattle drifted through red dust. A dog circled the herd. Somewhere near the corrals, another man was singing under his breath while he worked a rope through his hands. For a moment, nobody inside the bus spoke. Then a young German woman named Lotte Bauer pressed her fingers to the hot glass and whispered, "Are those the men from the American picture shows?" The guard near the door heard her. He did not laugh. He only looked out at the rider and said, "No, ma'am. Those are the men who keep this place running." That was the first crack in the story Lotte had carried across the Atlantic. She had been told Americans were loud, crude, cruel, and hungry for revenge. She had imagined a prison of iron beds and shouted orders. She had imagined guards waiting to make them suffer for every bomb that had fallen in Europe. Instead, the air smelled of dust, horse sweat, hot bread, and hay. There were fences, yes. There were watchtowers, yes. But outside the wire, men moved cattle with low voices and small gestures. No screaming. No whips. No panic. Lotte had never seen discipline that quiet. Back home, order had worn polished boots. It had shouted from platforms. It had turned people into numbers. Here, order rode a horse, leaned into the wind, and trusted an animal weighing half a ton to understand pressure without fear. That contradiction held her before any speech could. A prison camp that sounded peaceful. Enemy guards who spoke politely. Cowboys outside the fence who seemed freer than anyone she had ever known. And by nightfall, the contradiction became harder. The women were shown to a barracks that smelled of pine boards and soap. Their blankets were folded. Their water buckets were full. The mess hall served beans, cornbread, potatoes, and coffee strong enough to burn the tongue. One woman stared at the plate and said, "This is a trick." Another answered, "Then it is a warm trick." No one laughed very loudly. They were still too afraid. After dark, Lotte lay awake on the top bunk and listened for the sounds a prisoner learns to fear. Boots stopping at the door, keys turning, orders barked in the dark. But the night gave her crickets, wind, and the low, steady call of cattle beyond the fence. For the first time in years, no siren tore the sky open. For the first time in years, the darkness did not belong to bombers. Lotte turned her face toward the small window and saw stars so clear they seemed almost rude. A woman below her whispered, "It is too quiet." Lotte kept staring at the sky. "Maybe this is what quiet is," she said, "when nobody is afraid of it." The next morning, an American captain stood in front of the women with a clipboard under one arm. His sleeves were rolled up. His shirt collar was damp from the heat. "You are in custody," he said, "but you are not livestock. You will be housed, fed, paid camp credit for approved work, and treated under the convention. You will work because this country needs labor. You will obey rules because this is still a war. Those two facts will stand together." He let the interpreter finish. Then he added one more line. "You were sent here as enemies. You will not be treated as animals." The room changed around that sentence, not because the women trusted him, they did not, but because the word animals had not been used as a threat. It had been used as a boundary. Across the United States, hundreds of thousands of German prisoners had been placed in army camps. The farms still needed hands. The orchards still needed pickers. The cattle still needed fence lines, water tanks, and feed. In Texas, where sons and husbands had gone to war, a pair of strong hands mattered more than the accent attached to them. So Lotte and 12 others were sent to the WWII ranch, 40 miles from the camp, and farther from anything familiar than they had ever been. The truck rolled through land that refused to end. Grass browned by sun, windmills turning slowly, empty roads running toward a horizon that never came closer. A woman named Anka muttered, "There is nothing here." Lotte looked at a line of cattle moving in the distance. "No," she said, "there is space." And space was more frightening than walls. Walls told you where the danger was. Space made you ask whether you had been wrong about everything. At the ranch gate, the women met Thomas Rourke, the owner of the Bar W. He was not young. His face had been cooked by weather into permanent lines, and one shoulder sat lower than the other from an old break that had never healed right. Beside him stood his wife, Elena, holding a tray of tin cups filled with well water. Thomas looked over the women, not kindly exactly, but carefully. Then he said, "You work fair, you eat fair. You follow rules, nobody puts a hand on you. You run, the sheriff finds you before supper because there is nowhere to hide out here. Best not waste the daylight." Elena stepped forward with the cups. "Drink first," she said. "Texas does not care what uniform you wore." That line did what no speech from an officer could do. It made the women thirsty. They drank. And then they were given denim trousers, cotton shirts, straw hats, and gloves stiff with use. Their gray uniforms were folded away and stacked in a corner of the bunkhouse. Lotte held the denim in both hands. It was rough. It smelled of lye soap and sun. It carried no emblem, no rank, no eagle, no order stitched over the heart. For several seconds, she did not know why that made her want to cry. The first week nearly broke them. They rose before dawn, they hauled water, they filled troughs. They learned to coil rope, close gates, mend wire, and step away from a nervous hoof before it found their toes. The first time Lotte was placed beside a horse, she stood so stiff that the animal threw its head and backed away. Elena took the reins from her. "You are holding him as if he is an order," she said. Lotte flushed. "I do not know what else to do." "Then stop ordering." Elena placed the reins back in Lotte's hands, softer this time. "Ask with your body. Wait for the answer. If you pull hard enough, you can make him move once. If he trusts you, he will carry you all day." Lotte heard the words in English before the interpreter caught up. Ask. Wait. Trust. They sounded weak. Then the horse lowered its head, and suddenly they did not. By the second week, the women had learned the ranch had its own language. A lifted hand could turn a herd. A whistle could bring a dog. A quiet rider could do more than a shouting man. That unsettled Lotte more than Cruelty would have. Cruelty would have proved the old stories correct. Kindness forced a more dangerous question. What if strength did not need to be brutal? The answer came slowly, through work, not in speeches, in hands. A ranch hand named Caleb showed Anka how to repair a torn bridle without wasting leather. Elena taught the women to bake biscuits in an iron pan so heavy 2 of them had to lift it at first. Thomas taught them to read weather from dust, insects, and the way horses turn their backs to wind before a storm. No one asked them to forget the war. The war was everywhere. In ration books on the kitchen shelf, in letters penned beside the stove, in the black ribbon Elena wore for a nephew killed near Anzio, in the empty chair at Thomas Rourke's table where his oldest son had once sat before shipping out with the army. That empty chair was the thing Lotte could not look at for long, because every kindness at that ranch had a shadow behind it. These people had reasons to hate her, and still Elena passed her the coffee pot. By late August, the women could work 8 full hours and still walk back to the bunkhouse without falling onto the steps. Their hands darkened and split, their faces browned. Their German shoes wore out and were replaced with ranch boots. The army credited their labor at the standard prison rate. Not much, but enough for soap, paper, stamps, and a few sweets from the camp store. The ranch benefited more. Fences that had sagged for months stood straight again. Hay moved into the loft before the rain. Cabs were counted. Water lines were cleared. Cotton on a nearby farm was pulled before it could rot in the field. Their hands did not end the war. But in that small Texas county, their hands kept ordinary life from collapsing. And ordinary life, Lotte learned, was not ordinary at all. It was a table set before dark, a horse watered before yourself, a gate closed because the next person depended on it, a day's work done without anyone needing to threaten you into doing it. Then came the town. One Sunday, Thomas took 3 women in the truck to buy flour, nails, and salt blocks. Lotte went because she understood the most English. The town was only 2 streets, a depot, a church, a feed store, and a diner with dust on the windows. But news traveled faster than trucks. When the German women stepped down, conversations thinned. A man outside the feed store stared at Lotte's work clothes, then at her face. "My boy is in France," he said, "and we got enemy women buying sugar in our town." Thomas turned toward him. "They are buying nothing," he said. "I am." The man did not back down. "You trust them?" Thomas looked at Lotte. Then he said, "I trust work I can see." That should have comforted her. Instead, it cut, because she understood exactly what he meant. He did not trust her heart. He did not trust her history. He trusted the fence she had mended, the trough she had cleaned, the calf she had helped pull from a ditch. In town, humanity had to be proven in blisters. Inside the feed store, an older woman studied Lotte as she stacked flour on the counter. "My son writes from Belgium," the woman said. "He says German soldiers took everything from a farm family there." Lotte swallowed. "I am sorry," she said. The woman looked away. "Sorry is easy." Lotte had no answer. That night she did not join the others after supper. She walked to the corral and stood at the rail while the horses moved as dark shapes under the moon. Caleb found her there. "Town got under your skin?" She kept her hands on the rail. "They are right to hate us." Caleb leaned beside her and said nothing for a long while. Then he pointed toward a young mare standing alone. "That horse bit Thomas last spring. Nearly took 2 fingers. He did not shoot her. Why not? Because fear did the biting, not wickedness. Lot turned on him, sharper than she meant to. Is that what you think war is? Fear? No, Caleb said. War is what men build when fear gets uniforms. The line stayed with her longer than she wanted. 2 weeks later, a letter came from Germany. The camp guard delivered it at noon, but Lot did not open it until she was behind the barn, sitting in the thin shade of a mesquite tree. Her mother's handwriting looked smaller than she remembered. The letter was short. Her father had not returned from the Eastern Front. Her brother was missing. Their street had been burned after the last bombing raid. The church still stood, but without windows. Food was scarce. Neighbors who had once saluted now kept their eyes down and traded wedding rings for potatoes. At the bottom, her mother had written only one line that felt alive. I pray there is grass where you are. Lotte folded the letter once, then again. Then she pressed it to her mouth and made no sound at all. Grief did not arrive as a cry. It arrived as a sudden hatred of the blue sky above her. How dare this place be whole? How dare the cattle graze? How dare the wind smell of sage and hay? How dare breakfast be waiting in a kitchen while her mother stood in a broken street counting potatoes? For 3 days, Lotte worked without speaking. Elena did not force her. She only left extra coffee by her plate, and on the 4th morning walked beside her to the east pasture. A calf had slipped through a washout near the creek bed and tangled one back leg in wire. It bawled so hard the cows answered from every direction. Thomas was away. Caleb had ridden fence on the north section. The women and Elena reached the calf first. The wire had cut deep, not enough to kill, but enough to ruin the animal if they moved too fast. Anka panicked. Another woman started shouting for help. Lotte dropped to her knees. Quiet, she said. Everyone froze. She took the calf's head against her thigh, the way she had once held wounded men in a field hospital. She covered its eyes with her scarf. She told Anka to hold the wire steady, told Elena to bring pliers, told the youngest woman to stand between the mother cow and the ditch with a feed sack raised high. Her voice did not rise. Her hands did not shake. For 10 minutes, the whole pasture obeyed her. When the last strand came loose, the calf kicked once, staggered up, and limped toward its mother. Elena looked at Lotte's bloody hands. You knew what to do. Lotte stared at the calf. I knew how to keep pain from becoming panic. That was the first time the ranch saw more than a German prisoner in her. Not because she became harmless, not because the war disappeared. Because competence is hard to argue with when it is kneeling in the dirt, saving what everybody else was about to lose. After that, the town changed by inches. Not all at once, never in the way stories pretend. The feed store man still watched them. Some women still crossed the street. One church family refused to sit near them when the ranch brought the prisoners in for a harvest supper, but an old widow sent a jar of peach preserves to the bunkhouse. The feed store clerk began speaking directly to Lotte instead of through Thomas. A boy whose father was overseas asked her if Germany had cowboys. Lotte thought about it. Then she said, No, that may be the problem. The boy laughed so suddenly that even Thomas smiled. By autumn, the Texas heat loosened. Mornings came silver and cold. The grass turned brittle. The the cattle grew heavy against winter, and the war in Europe began to sound different on the radio. Not finished, not yet, but wounded. At night, the women gathered around the bunkhouse stove while the wind pushed dust against the walls. They spoke of home as if describing a country none of them had visited. What would be left? Who would still be alive? Would they be welcomed, blamed, hungry, silent? Would they be punished for surviving in a place that had fed them? Lotte kept her mother's letter folded inside the lining of her coat. Beside it, she kept another object, a small brass concho from an old broken saddle. Caleb had tossed it into the scrap bucket after a repair. Lotte had picked it out because it caught the light. He saw her looking at it and said, "You want it?" "It is broken." "Most things worth keeping are." So she kept it, not as a token of romance, not as a promise, as proof that something worn could still shine if held at the right angle. In May 1945, the announcement came. Germany had surrendered. The camp gathered the prisoners and read the news in English, then German. Some women sobbed. Some crossed themselves. Some stared forward without expression, as if they had been waiting so long for the end that they no longer knew how to receive it. Lotte felt relief first, then dread. Because the end of the war did not mean the beginning of home. It meant home could no longer stay imagined. The repatriation lists came later, not immediately. Paperwork moved slowly. Governments argued. Ships filled. Men were processed before women attached to auxiliary units. That delay gave Lotte one more season in Texas, one more branding day, one more spring storm, one more row of fence repaired after floodwater tore the posts loose, one more month of waking before dawn and hearing horses shift in the dark. By then, the ranch no longer felt soft to her. It felt honest. It had burned her skin, blistered her hands, bent her back, and demanded the truth every morning. Work first, fear second, self-pity last. On her final day at the Bar W, Thomas did not make a speech. He was not that kind of man. He handed her a clean envelope with her wages converted into canteen notes, her papers, and a recommendation written in blocky English. Then, he pointed to the south fence. "That line held through 2 storms because you set the posts deep." Lotte looked toward the fence. It ran across the pasture in a hard, straight seam, ordinary to anyone who did not know what it had cost. Thomas cleared his throat. "Wherever they send you, set things deep." Elena hugged her at the truck. The other women cried openly. Lotte did not until Caleb placed the brass concho in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "You already took it," he said. "Now take it proper." She looked at the small, broken piece of saddle metal. "I was your enemy." Caleb shook his head. "You were on the other side. That ain't always the same thing." The truck carried them back toward the camp road under a sky so wide it made every goodbye feel unfinished. At the gate, Lotte turned once. The Bar W shrank behind dust. The corrals blurred. The horses became moving shadows. The fence line held. Years later, when people asked her what America had been, she did not describe a flag first. She described a horse lowering its head when she stopped pulling. A woman handing water to an enemy before asking her name. A rancher judging trust by work instead of speeches. A town learning, slowly and imperfectly, that grief and mercy could stand in the same room. She described the sky, because no ceiling had ever frightened her again. And she described the brass concho, dented and bright, that crossed the ocean in her pocket. Germany had taken her certainty. War had taken her father, her brother, and the easy shape of home. But Texas gave her one lesson the camps, uniforms, and speeches never could. Freedom was not the absence of fences. It was the moment a person behind one remembered how to stand upright inside herself. And under that hard Panhandle sky, a German prisoner learned that the strongest gate in the world is the one fear stops building in the heart.